On the 17th of October 2008, a 29-year-old man named Vincent Miller went squirrel hunting in Wymps Gap Woods, Fayette County, Pennsylvania. There, across 2 days, a series of harrowing events unfolded, one so disturbing that for over a decade he refused to talk about what happened to him. The following account was given by Vincent to an investigator on the 3rd of October 2019. The interview was arranged by Vincent, and during this, the investigator noted how it seemed imperative to him that he finally told his version of events. What you're about to hear is Vincent Miller's interview, told in his own words, about what took place that fateful day in Wymps Gap Woods. Where I lived in rural Pennsylvania is well documented for having weird and downright creepy stuff happen. Everyone knew of someone who had a surreal tale of supposed UFO crashes, unexplainable occurrences, and sightings of unfamiliar creatures in Wymps Gap Woods. Some thought those stories were fiction, derived by delusional locals who believed their own lies and were after a quick buck. And some were less dismissive, and spoke about Wymps Gap and the stories that surrounded it with an air of intrigue and caution. I was always in the latter camp. I believe there were more to the stories in fiction, but I had no proof to say otherwise. All I knew is how I felt when I ventured into those woods. Since I was just a boy and I went hunting with my dad, I felt the tingle on the nape of my neck. I saw the shadows among the trees, and I had a feeling there was someone or something watching me. I knew something was out there in those woods, but the older I became, the more I ignored my gut feeling. Instead, I told myself that those stories were just that, stories, as I took the hiking trek into the belly of the forest. Little did I know when I stepped in there with just a backpack filled with a day's supplies, a small rifle for shooting squirrels, and when I came out, the chilling events I was about to witness would change me forever. The single ear-piercing scream, the mangled, severed hand, that thing from my nightmares looking straight at me. I'm going to tell you the horrifying events that occurred to me on that day 10 years ago. It's still as vivid in my mind now as it was then, a scar that refuses to fade. And trust me, I have my share of them. I was squirrel hunting in a really thick part of the woods. Back then, I got a kick from the hunting squirrels in the early autumn when the leaves were falling around me, the air cool, the sun bright. When I was deep in the woods, I heard voices echoing through the trees. As I walked closer, I spotted people, 2 of them, old fellas in faded camo coveralls with their shotguns balanced against a rock. I was going to turn and walk the other way. They were probably just hunting rabbits or deer, and I knew better to approach anyone in the wild who had a firearm on them. But I stood on a twig, and a loud snap caught their attention. Before they could go and get their guns, I stepped out in front of them and I gave them a nod and gesture. They fell silent and looked at me. Real intimidating looks that made me feel as if I'd stepped in or on something I shouldn't have. I sensed the tension, and if it wasn't for their age and the fact that they weren't holding their shotguns, I wouldn't have stuck around and spoken to them for as long as I did. I pointed at their guns. I asked them if they'd had any good catches. The taller and grayer man shook his head, causing the light affixed to his camo ball cap to wobble, and he sneered under his breath as if I'd said something funny. He looked at his friend. He was bigger with an unkempt red beard, and he sneered too. Feeling like I was at the butt of the joke, I turned to leave, but then I saw that engraved Sasquatch bone-handled knife on the bearded guy's belt. I knew enough to know that it was something special, so I pointed at it and I told him I liked his knife. His demeanor softened and he rubbed his gold-ringed finger over the knife blade. He was grinning to himself, and it was like I'd just complimented his kids or something. He proudly told me how he made it from the thigh bone of a dead bear he'd found in these very woods back when he was hunting as a teenager. He dragged it home, cleaned it up. Then when he got the money, he had a local knife maker fit it to a perfect hard steel blade for dressing and skinning deer and bear. As soon as he was finished talking, he stared past me with his squinted eyes and then looked at his friend. They both grabbed their backpacks and shotguns and headed toward the trees. As they walked, the bearded man looked back at me and in cold voice told me that these woods were no place for me and I should get out while I still could. I just nodded at him. I mean, what else was I meant to do? I was no novice in these woods. I only wished I'd listened to him and left right then and there, but I didn't. I walked deeper into the woods. That day I covered a lot of ground, at least a few miles. And even though I thought I knew the area like the back of my hand, I guess I wasn't paying attention, and I realized I was in an unfamiliar part where the trees seemed taller, the terrain more unruly. As I said, I'm no novice to these woods, but on that day, something felt different, which I know contributed to me getting lost. Something just wasn't right out there. I saw the shadows flicker in the tree lines, and I could sense it. I could sense something watching me. This had gone on all day. At one point when I saw something moving behind the branches, I went to look. That's when I saw a clump of something tangled in one of the branches. This coarse black fur was at my head height, meaning it didn't make sense for it to belong to an animal. With the sun going down fast, I knew that I was going to have to suck it up and resign myself to sleeping in the woods and trying to find my truck in the morning. I had matches, water, and a squirrel I shot. I never did get to eat that squirrel. If I had known what was about to happen to me, I would have run like crazy. I wouldn't have stopped running until I got the hell out of there. I was cooking the damn squirrel when I heard this strange low howling. It wasn't quite a growl, but it wasn't human either. I've heard a lot of things in those woods, but never a howl like that. Gave me the chills and I instantly thought back to being a kid and seeing something within those trees. A blur of dark shadow. A chill on the nape of my neck. I itched my neck and I stared around in panic. The sky was darkening and I couldn't see much ahead. I tried to push my fears aside and convince myself nothing was there. It was just my mind playing tricks on me. I laughed at myself and I mused how this was no time for an overactive imagination. Then I looked up and that's when I saw it. The shadowy outline in the trees. Something was watching me. I stayed as still as I could while slowly reaching for my penknife. I could feel my heart thudding beneath my jacket, and I hoped that whatever was there couldn't hear it too. The rustles continued, branches hitting branches, low, somehow otherworldly sounding howls. I wasn't imagining it. Something was out there, something close by. Then I heard it, the single blood-curdling human scream, the boom of a shotgun, then another boom. Crashing sounds were up ahead and were coming my way. I didn't even grab my backpack, I just ran. As I frantically weaved through the trees, unable to properly see where I was going and bashing from tree to branch, I felt my jacket tag on a branch or something and it catapulted me backward. I tore it free and kept on going. I heard something behind me. I turned and I saw a pair of large, dark eyes staring at me through the trees. They were too big to be human. I knew that much. Then they vanished. I tried scrambling to my feet. I was in sheer panic. Knowing something was out there chasing me was terrifying. And that scream. A scream like that didn't come from anything natural. I tried to get out of there, but then it happened. I felt the impact on the back of my head and everything went dark. I opened my eyes to my head pounding, my mouth dry, and in a clearing in a part of the woods I didn't recognize. I opened my eyes, head pounding, mouth dry, in a clearing in a part of the woods I didn't recognize. My backpack, knife, and rifle were nowhere to be seen. I was lying in the dirt, mud, and what looked like debris of some sort. I was disoriented. It took me some time to remember what happened and figure out what was going on. I was so confused I think I shouted out for my dad, even though at this point, he'd been dead for years. That's when I saw it in front of me. A severed hand placed among the dirt and leaves. The lines of age were visible despite how mangled it was, and I knew I'd seen that hand before. I recognized the gold ring. I'd seen it earlier that day. It was the bearded man's ring. I stared at that hand in pure dread. Part of me was hoping this was someone's idea of a joke, a sick one. But the more I stared at it, the more I knew nothing about this was fake. At this point, I was frozen to the spot with fear. It paralyzed me. My nightmare continued when, to my horror, I heard movement and watched coyotes, 2 of them, appear from behind the trees. They went straight for that hand and devoured it. I saw him tearing chunks off and I heard the crunch as teeth met raw flesh. I couldn't move. I just watched on helplessly until what I dreaded happened. The coyotes finished with their hand and they turned. With a thirst in their eyes, they focused on me. I thought this was it. This was how I was going to die. A painful, nasty death. I reached behind me for something, anything, and placed my hand on a small rock with a jagged edge. The dogs sniffed at the air and growled under their breaths as they moved toward me. I saw their bared teeth and their blood-matted muzzles. As they came toward me, I looked past them and at the spot where the hand had been. Now just a pile of bones and tendons. But shining amid the destruction was that man's gold ring. I thought this was it, and I found myself praying. I'm not religious, but in that moment, I pleaded for help from a higher power. I didn't want to die like this and in this way. As the coyotes neared me, I tightened my grip on that rock. Something happened. They stopped abruptly and twitched their ears as if they heard something. Then, emitting quiet whimpers, they turned and ran off beyond the tree. I sat there confused but also panicked. They left for a reason. The coyotes are capable of many things, but slicing a hand clean off was not one of them. They hadn't done that. Someone or something else had, and I was certain that whatever it was had scared those coyotes away. I heard those low, haunting howls, and I saw something through the darkness. A light, shining frantically up and down, back and forth across the branches, leaves, briars as it moved in and out of the trees. Then something flew through the air. It landed on the dirt right in front of me, and I looked in horror at the stomach-churning mess that lay before me. It was a ball-like shape, gray, weathered and covered in clumps of dry blood. But it wasn't a ball, it was a human head. The head of the old man I'd met in the woods. Its left ear was chewed clean off, and its one eye was hanging out of its socket. The light of his hat flickered, highlighting the grotesque sight beneath it. I let out a silent scream, and I scampered backward. I knew I needed to get up to my feet and get out of there. I didn't want to come face to face with that horror that was capable of this. I managed to get to my feet, and I hurtled toward the trees. I flung past them. My sole aim, to get out of there, to get away from whatever had done that to those men. There was this muffled sound, low, a lower frequency than any coyote. Then I felt something slam me forward, face first into the tree. I busted my nose, and through that haze of blood and confusion I saw it step around me. It towered over me, double my height at least. Thick black hair covered the entirety of its body and its eyes, its dark white eyes. There was something familiar and terrifying about them. It was holding something, and it struck at me with a swift movement. I felt a pain like no other, and was certain it had impaled me with something. Then I saw the cut on the top of my shoulder, and the item poking out of the tree trunk above it. I saw the familiar handle, that man's Sasquatch knife. I blinked my eyes, and that thing leaned forward through the darkness and sniffed at me. I heard it breathing. I felt its rancid breath on my face and sensed its rows of razor-sharp teeth just millimeters away from me. I closed my eyes and thought this was it. This would be my gruesome death. I felt movement next to me. Then I heard footsteps. When I opened my eyes, I saw that the thing had pulled the knife free and turned and disappeared. Then the flickering light went out, clouding me in pitch black. I leaned against that tree, trying to hold my breath and not to move. I thought that the thing was going to jump out and attack me at any moment. I was waiting for it to happen. At that point, I'd resigned myself to that. Then I remembered the coyotes. They were sure to attack, so in terror I waited and waited, still as a stone. But even the rampaging coyotes had gone too. Without as much as a whimper or a cracking twig. I was alone in the shadows of the dark woods, and I don't know. I guess my adrenaline ran out, and I must have collapsed from sheer fright and exhaustion. I woke at the beginnings of daylight. I was freezing, caked in dirt, blood. I was sure this was some kind of crazy fever dream of eating some sort of infected squirrel. My nose and shoulder ached. My whole body ached. But I walked forward and eventually came to the clearing. There I saw the gory mess I hoped I wouldn't find. Chewed bits of bones and skulls, no intact bones at all. Next to this, and with the contents bloodied and flung about, those old men's backpacks. Seems they had stuffed their backpacks full of some poor farmer's secret harvest of wild ginseng. It was no doubt worth a fortune, but it had cost them greatly. They must have been poachers and thieves, but even they didn't deserve that fate. No poor soul deserved that. There among the mangled pile of remains I saw it, the skinniest, shiniest, goldest little hoop of a wedding ring. And there, gnawed in it, were tooth marks. I thought about pocketing that ring as proof, but then I decided against it. I buried it out there, in those woods, right there in the clearing, and made a silent prayer to those slaughtered men. Then I staggered through the woods. I don't know how long I walked for. Time was irrelevant at this point. I just knew I had to keep on moving. I had to get out of there. I was found passed out in the middle of a curved road out in the woods, but I have no recollection of getting there. The only logical explanation is that I somehow made it to the road and then my body gave out. The driver who found me said he almost hit me, and that my eyes were frosted over, but I was muttering something about wide eyes and loose heads. He clearly thought I was hallucinating from exposure to elements. I knew this wasn't the case. He drove me to the hospital and they fixed up my injured shoulder and nose. I said I didn't remember what happened. I don't know if the doctor believed me, but he didn't question me anymore on it. I don't know why that thing spared me, but it did. And sometimes I think that's the worst part. What if it didn't spare me because of mercy? What if it just isn't finished with me yet? I've thought about it a lot over the years, and I don't think that old man's knife had been made from bone of bear, but from one of those things. But how did the creature know I wasn't with those men? Why did it spare me? I don't know. I'll never know for sure. But my guess would be it watched me for years, since I was a kid hunting with my dad in those woods, and that's why it spared me. I've been keeping the harrowing events of what happened to myself for over 10 years. I feared people would mark me as crazy. Those old men were reported missing and were never found, just like countless other hikers and hunters had been gone missing in those woods over the years. This was a heavy weight to bear